Hello, my friends, and happy Easter. It is Easter week, 8 days, an octave. We celebrate the joy of Easter Sunday for 8 days on the church calendar because there's so much joy it can't be contained in one single day, just like Christmas is an octave of 8 days. As I think about the joy of the resurrection, I can't help but think about Holy Saturday. What a very long and difficult day that must have been. Can you imagine the horror of the crucifixion the day before, and then this deafening silence? What must it have been like? Now, where do we next encounter, after we hear about the crucifixion, the next time we encounter the apostles, where are they? They're hiding in the upper room for fear of the Jews, it says in Scripture. I can understand that. The worst thing had happened, and their hopes were dashed. I mean, he told them he was going to rise, but witnessing the crucifixion, the humiliation of it, can't even imagine what they must have gone through. I mean, they must have been so fearful. When I was meditating on the rosary once, I looked up, we go right from Good Friday to Easter Sunday. We totally skip over Holy Saturday. But let's be honest, isn't that where most of us live? Locked up in fear, afraid to hope, afraid to look ahead. All right, we're called to a resurrection faith, and most of us are living what I call a Holy Saturday kind of faith. All right, we're just locked up in fear. And we know the story. We know he rose from the dead, but do we really believe we will? Do we really believe the big crosses in our life can ever be really resolved? Obviously they can, right? Do we have faith that God can turn it around? Or are you locking up in fear? All right, think of the two disciples that Jesus met on the road to Emmaus. They're walking along and he joins them and they don't recognize him. And he asked them what they're talking about, and they stood still looking sad. And they said, "We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Had hoped, past tense. Now, they were walking with Jesus. They didn't see him. They didn't recognize him. He was there. And yet they had hoped. They were in despair. They lost hope in spite of the fact he had told them he would rise, and even after the women had reported what they saw, they had hoped. All right, what does that tell us about us? I mean, we know the story, we know he rose, but when bad things happen, do we give up? Do we lock ourselves up in fear? It's easy to lose faith, isn't it? So I think there's 3 lessons here to move from a Holy Saturday kind of faith to faith in the true resurrection. Right? First, remember God's mercies. Start with Scripture. What does God tell us? How has he worked throughout salvation history to save his people? All right, if we think of the Exodus and how he confounded Pharaoh with one plague after another, parted the Red Sea for his people. Think of Joseph in the Old Testament. He was imprisoned for something he didn't do. But God used all of that to save his people from famine later on. Right? Go to the New Testament. Read about Jesus' miracles. They're still happening today. All right, find those stories. Immerse yourself in God's amazing, miraculous power. All right, remember his mercies. Lesson number 2, stay close to the Eucharist. What does it say? After they're walking with him and he goes, they're going to separate, and they ask him to stay. There was something inside that knew they wanted him to stay with them. And he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread, the Eucharist. So the sacraments are what enable our faith. All right, sometimes we feel like I got to have faith before I can go. No. The sacraments are what enable our faith, that will give you the eyes to see. All right, rather than walking blindly, the sacraments enable our faith. Last lesson, take action. Mary Magdalene and the other women, they prepared the spices. This is what their tradition was, what they were called to do to go anoint the body of Jesus. The apostles and disciples, they're hiding in the upper room. They're scared. But they did what they felt God called them to do, and they saw the miracle, right? He appeared to Mary Magdalene. All right, so sometimes we're walking along in despair. Try to make sense of those contradictions, just like the apostles on the road to Emmaus. We need to sometimes commiserate with others. We need people to talk to and understand. But Jesus is here, whether we see him or not. He is walking right beside you. So it's okay. If you're really going through something difficult, it's okay to pull into a safe space. Sometimes we need that. But the great message of Easter is not to stay there too long, because you can miss a miracle that way. So really ponder that. Do you want a Holy Saturday kind of faith? Or let's really take an Easter Sunday kind of faith and choose to believe in the resurrection. So I hope you find that helpful, inspiring. Share it with your friends. God bless you, and happy, happy Easter.